Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rizky Amelia. I will explain fiction and non-fiction material to fulfill my course assignment, Introduction to Literature. Without lingering anymore, let's watch. Fiction and non-fiction. What is fiction? Fiction is a narrative prose that is imaginary or non-scientific by the author and not based on reality. In other words, fiction does not occur in the real world and is based solely on one's imagination or thoughts. Characteristic of fiction. Fiction is an imagination of the author. Works of fiction do not have a standard systematics. Generally, fiction uses language that is connotative or not actual. In fiction, there is truth that is relative or not absolute. Generally, works of fiction target the reader's emotions or feelings, not logic. A work of fiction, there is a certain moral message or mandate. Fictional structure consists of 6 structures, namely, number 1 is abstract. In the story, can be there and not. This section is the essence of the fictional text. Number 2 is orientation. This orientation section contains an introduction to the theme, background themes, and also characters in fictional stories, put at the beginning and become a discussion of the fictional text. Number 3 is complication. This is the section where the climax of a fictional text and the problem will appear. Most of the complications in a fictional story attract the reader. Number 4 is evaluation. In this evaluation section, it contains an explanation about solving the problem at hand. Number 5 is resolution. In this part of the resolution is contains solving of the problems faced by the main character. Number 6 is coda. In this section contains message and positive moral message that can be learned from a fictional story. Elements of fiction. Theme is the general basic ideas in a work contained in it. Characterization is the author way of presenting a character. Groove. Groove is the sequence of events in the story. Climax is conflict has reached a high level of intensity and is an event that cannot be avoided. Conflict is important events in the story. Setting is the place, environment, and time of the event being told. Viewpoint is a way of looking at the author to be able to present a character in the setting and events. Mandate, the message that the fiction writer wants to convey to the audience through the fiction story. Kind of fiction. Number 1 is fairy tales. Fairy tales are fictional stories that are imaginary and tell magical things that conveyed from mouth to mouth and from generation to generation. Usually starts with once upon a time and ends with they lived happily ever after. For examples are Little Red Riding Hood.
Little girl looks delicious. She will be mine.
The wolf went up to Little Red Riding Hood and spoke to her in his friendliest voice.
Hello, little girl.
That she forgot she wasn't supposed to talk to strangers.
No, they aren't for my mother. They are for my grandmother. I'm going to visit.
Alice in Wonderland.
There is a place like no place on earth. Some say to survive it, you need to be as mad as a hatter. Which luckily, I am. Alice, it's you. You're back. Alice! Alice! See? Alice? You're absolutely Alice. I'd know you anywhere. You're all late for tea.
And Frozen. Number 2 is myth. It's a story passed down from generation, trying to explain how our world works, or we should treat each other, which is related to local people's belief in supernatural objects, gods, goddesses, and spirits believed to have supernatural powers. An example is Orpheus and Eurydice.
Him. If he did, she would return to the land of the dead forever. Orpheus began to climb. Light of day, he gave in to temptation. Orpheus tried to return to the underworld, but was refused entry.
Number 3 is legend. Legend is to tell the origin of a place, be it an area, a region, or a place that is now used as a tourism object. Besides that, it also tells about natural events and the occurrence of objects, with imaginary stories that contain miracles. An example is the legend of Lake Toba.
Masir obeyed her. Immediately the sky was dark and lightning struck. A flood appeared from the river. Toba's wife suddenly jumped towards the tide.
Number 4 is fable. Fable is a story about animal life with behavior and society like humans. In the fable, the animals are used as characters in the story. And Zootopia.
Hobbs, parking duty.
Sir, I'm not just some token bunny.
You strike out, you resign.
Deal. Hello? I'm here to ask you some questions about a case.
Then they should have gotten a real cop to solve it.
You are under arrest.
For what? Hurting your feelings?
You are...
Number 5 is novel. A novel is a fictional story that tells part of a person's life story. This story will tell a long story about the character's relationship with the people around him, complete with a description of his character. An example is Fun Girl by Rainbow Rowell. Number 6 is short story. It's a form of fiction that contains much less than roman or novel. However, the short story has its own charm because it can be an initial lesson for writers in making a written work, usually 5 until 12 pages long. only has 1 until 3 main characters and 1 main setting. An example is the work entitled "Oh Honey, That's Absolutely Not Love." Number 7 is Roman. Roman is a fictional story that describes the chronicles of the characters' lives in detail and depth. The life that is depicted is not only a fragment of life, but starts from birth to adulthood. Roman is literally work older than novel. An example is the rise and fall of an empire. Number 8 is epic. Epic is a kind of traditional literary work that tells stories of heroism. An example is Beowulf.
I am Beowulf. I will kill your monster. Tonight will be different.
Genre of fiction. Historical fiction is fiction whose basic writing is history. This work is tied to historical facts, but this fiction also provides room for fictionality, for example, by providing the thoughts and feelings of the characters through conversations. For example are The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende and Gollum and the Genie by Helena Waker. Science fiction is fiction which is basically science fact. This work is bound by scientific facts, both science and technology, which are then imagined in the life of society and individuals. For example, are Star Wars and Iron Man. Biographical fiction. This biographical fiction tells about a person's life. Biographical works also provide space for fictionality. For example, in the form of adetus given by the author. Besides, there are also forms of dialogue. An example is Little Woman by Louisa May Alcott. Horror is the type of genre in which the story and plot are constructed in such a way as to give the reader or audience feel a sensation of goosebumps, tension, and fear. For example are It, The Saw, and Annabelle. Fantasy is a genre that has magical and supernatural elements, dabbling in a world that seems completely surreal, but is actually very logical. For example are Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Romance is a genre that actually elevates everyday life. As for the part of life that everyone always feels is falling in love, seeing love, and love. For example are Verses of Love, Wotakoi, Love is Hard for Otaku, and The Fault in Our Stars. Comedy. Genres have stories that contain humor or silly elements that will make the reader laugh and really entertain. For example are Mr. Bean and Dumb and Dumber. Mystery. Mystery is a story that makes readers feel curious throughout the story because many things are covered and uncovered one by one. Mystery stories emphasize the element of twist and require strong tricks to maintain their mystery. For example are Sherlock Holmes and Detective Conan. And the last is adventure. Adventure is an important event or event that occurs in someone's life, usually presents danger or gives the reader a sense of excitement. An adventure does not have to travel to a distant place, but can have an event that can change something, be it yourself or someone else. For example are Moana and Jumanji. Non-fiction. Non-fiction is an essay made based on facts or facts that exist in real life. Non-fiction contains events that actually exist and are informative. It requires observation in making it. Therefore, non-fiction stories can be justified in their content and are usually used as reference material for information or sources for readers. Non-fiction can be presented both subjectively and objectively. Characteristic of non-fiction. Using denotative language. Denotative language has a real meaning. That is, the language is limited and does not mean double or ambiguity. This is done so that readers can interpret it according to the meaning the writer wants to convey. Formal language. In non-fiction stories, usually use language that conforms to linguistic rules. However, there are also those who use it in a casual or literary style. Whether casual or literary language, the information conveyed by the reader must be in accordance with reality or valid. Compiled based on exciting facts. Non-fiction texts are compiled based on actual observations and data. Therefore, non-fiction books are often used as a source of information for their readers. Non-fiction can be justified by the author. Have ideas written systematically, clearly, and logically. Non-fiction stories have rules or systems that must be obeyed, and because it is based on a fact, then non-fiction must be clear and make sense. Completion of previous findings or new discovery. Non-fiction stories can be in the form of pre-existing stories or stories that will be created based on the data found. There is intellectual interpretation and analysis. In non-fiction, it must be in accordance with the interpretation based on science and analysis. As much as possible to be high objectivity. This is done so that the facts and data presented to the reader are in accordance with their truths and are not influenced by the subjectivity of the author. Non-fiction structure. Non-fiction has the following structures, namely, number 1 is orientation. This section introduces a discussion that will be studied in a non-fiction story. Orientation contains the introduction of the characters involved in the story and the beginning of a story. Number 2 is sequence of events. Describes the sequence of events or events that occurred from the beginning to the end of the problem. Number 3 is reorientation. Contains the conclusion and the ending of the story. generally contains very or moral message that can be taken. Non-fiction divisions. Non-fiction is divided into two, namely, pure non-fiction is a book that contains development based on authentic data, or for sure example of pure non-fiction, namely thesis, scientific work, reports, papers, dissertation, articles, features, and other. Creative non-fiction, starting with authentic data and then developing it based on imagination, which is generally in the form of novels, poetry, and prose. Kind of non-fiction. There are so many kinds of non-fiction and many variations. I will only describe 8 kinds of non-fiction. Among others are: Number 1 is travelogue. Travelogue or travel notes is a form of memory documentation in the form of writing. Travelogue can be a complement to photos or videos, or sometimes it can be enjoyed even without photos. For example, travelogue in the form of videos on YouTube. Number 2 is dictionary. It's a kind of reference book that explains the meaning of words. The dictionary serves to help someone recognize new words. In addition to explaining the meaning of a word, a dictionary may also have a guideline for designation, the origin of a word, and also an example of its use for a word. Number 3 is encyclopedia. It's a reference work or summary that provides summaries of information from all branches of knowledge or from a specific field. Encyclopedia are divided into articles or entries that are often arranged alphabetically and sometimes by thematic categories. Encyclopedia articles are longer and more detailed than even the most extensive dictionaries. For example, is the Usborne Science Encyclopedia.
Information that they need. It's a great homework help, but it's also just super beautiful to look at on its own in action. So that's kind of cool. I'd never seen that before. But it's just a really, really beautiful encyclopedia set.
Number 4 is memoir. Memoirs are mementos that resemble autobiographies by emphasizing the narrator's opinions, impressions, and responses to events experienced and the character associated with them. The details of history in memoirs are not absolutely correct, however, they remain important material for biographical writing. For example, is Once More We Saw Stars by Jason Greens. Number 5 is Almanac. Almanac is an annual publication containing tabular information on one or more topics arranged accordingly. Data and various other types are also found in the almanac, such as the time of rising and setting of the sun and moon, the dates of the eclipse, the times of high and low tide, religious celebrations, and others. Number 6 is natural history. Natural history is the scientific research of both plants and animals is more towards observational, experimental methods of learning and includes more research published in magazines than in academic journals. So the term is considered obsolete in the scientific community due to the scientific revolution. A person who specializes in natural history is called a naturalist. For example, is natural histories, rare books from the American Museum of Natural History Library.
Specific species. In some cases, the species described in some of these volumes are extinct. So the only way scientists can see these species is to take a look at one of these volumes and examine the illustrations. In the earliest days of scientific illustration, many of the illustrators had never even seen the object of their work. It was described to them. That could work, but it also might not. This is one of the volumes.
Number 7 is scientific book. Scientific book is a scientific paper with in-depth discussion of the current problems of a science that summarizes the latest research results. Scientific books emphasize the theoretical aspect, which is a philosophical explanation, guide for step, guide, or a form of study published in book format. Number 8 is essay. It's a prose essay that discusses a problem in pacing from the personal point of view of the author. In the essay contains opinions, views, or personal expressions of the author regarding something that is happening or taking place in society. Another kind of nonfiction. There are many other kinds of nonfiction. Here there are approximately 30 kinds of nonfiction. Thank you for watching my video. That's my explanation of fiction and nonfiction.